komen ze er vandaan dan? Okay.
But maybe I'm making that up. So let me check.
Huh? We're on?
Are we live?
We're live. We're
Alive?
alive. Well, that's questionable. That's debatable. I'll let you look that up.
Oh, sorry.
And
I don't
were
see
you?
it.
No, you don't say it. Okay.
Vincent.
No, he said he does not want that. No questions halfway. How dare? Huh? Yeah. Just hello, hello, hello.
Hi.
Is the camera? The camera is rolling, so we're gonna get started. So there's no, yeah, just checking whether
Yeah.
there's any people that wanna come still. Hello, my name is Olave Talks, and I am here today with Simone van Saarloos. How do you pronounce it?
I now say Simon Simone van Saarloos.
Simon Simone van Saarloos.
Yeah, and
Okay.
then you can switch around.
Yeah, okay. Welcome to Olave Talks. This is the second Olave Talks we've done here at Het HEM. The very first one was with Kevin Godkin, and I explained a little bit then what Olave Talks was about, and because I thought that the people who came last time would come again, but they didn't come again, so I'm gonna have to re-explain again what Olave Talks is. Olave Talks is a project I started about 4 years ago, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, and it was born out of the fact that I met so many incredible queer people as I was sort of getting to know the activist, anti-racism, LGBTQIA plus activist scene and so on. And I would find myself having conversations with people before a demonstration, after demonstrations, while we were organizing a demonstration, at dinner or at my house on a date or something. And I would find myself having these conversations that I found so mind-blowing almost, that I felt every time challenged to think about things that I thought that I knew, to think about them in new ways. And that was kind of like my formative years towards the activist that I am, and yeah, what else am I? Just the activist that I am. Who knows? The writer that I am, and many times I would think I wish I had an archive, a way to document how amazing these conversations are and how much I learn from them, and also how much knowledge I'm able to create through that methodology, that format of just talking to someone in a vulnerable way, in a searching way, in an explorative way, and also in a way that also makes room for mistakes, right? Which is something I found oftentimes not really, I didn't find a lot of space for, whether it was online or whether it was offline, but in these intimate conversations with queer people, I was learning a lot, making mistakes, but being allowed to make mistakes and learn. So I thought of starting it and making kind of like a YouTube channel of it. And I did so for quite some time. I think for about 2 years I did that, and I would basically at the end of each month look at how much money I had left, and I would use the money from my salary or from my Social Security, and I would just sort of use it for paying somebody to come and film and edit and do subtitling, and that was it. And at some point, I moved to Germany, and my salary went much lower than what I had before, so I had to stop with Olave Talks because I had no way of paying for it. Until Simone van Saarloos was like, hey, do you want to come and do a few Olave Talks at Het HEM? And I was like, yay, I can do it again. And that's why we're here with Simone. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, of course, but I do think that you should also mention that you do have a podcast at this moment, which is not the
Yes,
same as,
true.
of course, a recorded conversation with the
Yeah.
visual, which is called, I think, Better Spaces with Kai Theater.
Yeah. Better Practices for Safer Spaces. It's a research residency I did with Kai Theater in Belgium. And the aim was to invite activists and organizers who were committed to creating safer spaces for vulnerable groups or whatever. And I wanted to get the lowdown on that because I think I hear it often, safer space, and I found myself, I don't know, I have this often with things that everybody seems to know. I kind of tend to think, but do I know it? So I thought, well, I don't know it, so let me invite people and tell me what it is. And those conversations have been really amazing. The 3rd episode just was released today, so get
I
on
already
that.
listened to it.
Yeah.
Yes, I did actually this morning.
They're long.
Yeah.
They're very long.
And also your introduction is 10 minutes long, which I fucking love. Because you basically start with holding space, right? Like you start with talking about how can we explore together this question, and how can we keep space for questioning, and also realizing that the language that we use is sometimes different, and therefore not immediately assuming like, oh, you said this word or you used this word. Well, you can tell it better. But
no, I think obviously, as in a setting like that, but also in this setting very much, what we're doing is in the context of a world that is changing very rapidly. And some of the things that are changing rapidly is indeed language is changing very rapidly. The kind of things I could say now about specific identities or about specific lived realities can be by tomorrow, there could be innovations on that language by tomorrow, right? In fact, we might innovate on that in our conversation, right? Also, analyses of what is going well, what is going wrong, those change also quite rapidly, which is a dynamic that I very much appreciate and that really inspires me. But I also think there is a dynamic of almost, like if you're not catching up, if you're not on the, on the most edgiest thing in terms of language or analyses, there is a real danger of being constructed or somehow seen as problematic. And so I find it important for us to kind of, as we're here and we're together and we're having a conversation, I find it important that we make space for vulnerability, for room to not be the edgiest, to perhaps not have answers, to not have the right language, whatever the right language may mean, and for the people that are listening in and that are witnessing and participating in that way, in that witnessing, to commit to a level of care for us and for themselves, right? So we might talk about things that come very close to your own experience. They might rub, they might be disruptive, they might distort ideas you might have. And I think when that becomes uncomfortable, when we experience pain or discomfort, I want to invite people to, as you're here and you're listening to us, to perhaps to develop some sort of, or to nurture some sort of curiosity towards that pain and the discomfort. To not externalize, not to be like, oh, Simona has upset me, and Olave has made me feel bad, but to be like, why is this idea or this notion or this fact, why is it making me feel uncomfortable? Why is pain coming here? What is this pain trying to tell me, right? And to be curious about that, to sit with it, to reflect upon it, to internalize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
that? Do you think that sort of making that space for the possibility of that happening is a way to divert also from the idea of the trigger warning, where you actually are pointing towards what could be harmful, which is also a sort of designating what could or could not be harmful, right? Like there's a certain, even though I'm not opposed so I'm not making like a binary claim whether we should or should not. But as you were saying this, which is much more sort of general point, right? Like this might happen in whatever kind of moment, in regards to whatever topic that might come up, instead of saying like, oh, now we're going to be talking about a subject that is defined already, preconceived already as potentially violent. Which is something that also comes up when making a show, right? For like the exhibition, I mean, then where there has been discussions where there would be like, oh, should we have like a warning for a certain kind of work because there's explicit sexual portrayal in it. And I really opposed of that because of this idea that you're actually pointing people towards what is then preconceived as potentially harming or potentially triggering. I mean,
there are certain conventions that I think are quite interesting, and I try to respect them as much as possible. There are certain conventions as to what kind of content people should be given warnings for. So I try to respect those. However, like as we're talking about abundance, there is such an incredible abundance of lived experiences, and therefore also of potential. I don't even want to just call it triggers necessarily, because I think triggers is a very specific thing that I have in mind of mental health. that are, you know, like really, like, I don't know, flashbacks and not just discomfort. I think discomfort and triggers are something very, or feeling a bit like, oh, I didn't know this thing, or wow, like I didn't expect that this thing is said. Like I think those are things I don't consider necessarily triggers as such. But yeah, there's such an incredible wealth of what violence is and how we experience it and how we perceive it that I try to keep like more of a methodology in place instead of like a content warning and therefore now whatever you do now, it's on your own. If you stay, it's your own fault, right? But while I think with this sort of methodology of care and sort of making some suggestions, it creates a much more, it's a suggestion for taking, and also I think implicit in that is that we can also take care of you, right? If there is something that is triggering in the conversation that we're having. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, yeah, absolutely. I just thought that maybe, indeed, like immediately relating it to abundance versus scarcity, where there's an assumption through warning around certain subjects, there's an assumption of scarcity to what can be harmful. And I'm reminded, because we're sitting here, I'm reminded of the conversation, of course, that you had with Kevin Godkin last week. And one of the things that Kevin mentioned was also that there can be a continuous question of care, right? So even if Daphne asks me whether I want my picture to be taken and I consent in this current moment, it could still change at some point. Yeah. And to hold space for that potential change and not say like, oh, but you said earlier on that it was fine. Yeah. That is something that Kevin also really tried to implement.
Yeah, true. Yeah. It was really amazing talking to Kevin. I learned a lot. But anyways, talking to you.
But maybe we can evoke Kevin's presence, because Kevin started each time that they spoke, they started with a breath to take. Okay. We can do that. And also we can do, of course, an access check-in.
Access check-in?
Yeah. So what Kevin would ask was, without wanting to expose, like without asking or like demanding that somebody should speak or that you should expose anything around your needs or your bodily presence at this current moment, they do start at every event or every sort of space together with this question: is there anything at this moment that you need as an access need for us to be able to take off and go? Which could be basically anything. It could be like having a sip of water, having a toilet break, speaking out your feeling at this current moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Could we maybe designate a kind of an access doula, perhaps? That might make it less like a lower threshold, because having to like raise your hand or whatever, or come up here and tell it, maybe that's a little bit more. Maybe Joni could be our access doula. But Joni, maybe you want to be visible to everyone so that everybody knows who is you. And you have, yeah. So this is Joe. This is our access doula, designated access doula. I hope this. So if there's anything, maybe indeed water. That's always very good in this heat. People stay hydrated, and I will share you my water with you if you want. Yeah. So talk to Joni. Yes, I like that. Thank you. But coming to you.
But the breath. Should we have the breath?
You know, do you do a thing?
Okay, so we do a communal or like a collective, like a breath, just taking a breath. So especially with this kind of breathless weather, I would say. Yeah, we just take a breath. That's how it works.
Oh, we just breathe.
Yeah, we just breathe.
Does everybody have water as well? Drink water, yes. A beer is also good.
If you want, we just put it here. You can always...
Okay, let me get to you. Yeah, Simone. Abundance. I was walking around, and I had this feeling like, wow, is it not too tall of an order to bring abundance into a space like this? I was walking there, and I know it's big, and I know it's spacious, I know it feels like, and at the same time I thought, when do you know you have brought in the abundant? Like, when do you know you're done? Or like, did somebody say, oh, we ran out of money? Or Like, how did that work? Yeah, is that how it works?
I mean, is it ever done, right? I don't think abundance can be done.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the first thing to say to that would be that it's not something that you do by yourself. So, I mean, Vincent van Velzen is here, who co-curated with me, which was amazing. And being able to draw from his knowledge when it comes to space, and then having Theo Deman and Clem Siles involved as scenographers who really made sort of the scenography, the kind of maze-like feeling, the curtains, through speaking with them around, like, what is this question of abundance? Like, does it have to be a space where you come in upstairs and you see everything at the same time, right? Which could evoke a feeling of abundance in the sense that, oh, if it's full, it's abundant. But we thought it was very important to have actually also some hiding happening, so that abundance is not just like the constant presence of many things at the same time, but that abundance is also the constant reminder of the presence of things that might not present themselves to you. Yeah. So a certain, and I'm also like evading now, as you might notice, maybe not, the language of like opacity and transparency, which feels immediately academic, which is fine. But it does have to do, of course, with this question of legibility and illegibility, where abundance does not mean necessarily that everything has to be immediately present, right? Because there is, of course, this question where it says like, oh, okay, so the potential or the attempt is the idea that it is possible to value everything at the same time, without differentiation, without categorization, without hierarchization. But to believe in that doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be shown, that everything has to reveal itself. Because actually abundance is also the prompt to value the fact that it will never actually all be known. So that is of course the best way to start making a show. I mean, or anything, because it doesn't have to be everything. If you believe that everything is present and everything exists, and that the everything is not something that you ever have to personally, singularly embody, you're kind of, it's kind of freeing. No, I mean, no, but I mean, it's an attempt,
we're gonna get
right?
to liberation. We're gonna get to liberation, but I'm just curious. Like, so as I was walking there, and I was wondering, is this? Am I invited into an understanding of abundance right now, or am I invited into a manifestation of the abundance, or is it more like a promise of what abundance could be? Like, I was trying to sort of understand, like, what kind of conceptual space am I walking into? Like a revelation, or am I sort of given a methodology? Am I given a promise? Or, like, I was kind of looking for that.
What do you feel most affiliated with, thinking with this
like
space?
I think, especially with just the diversity, like I couldn't say like, oh, I'm going in to watch. I'm seeing this particular type. It was such a diversity of things, documentaries, sculptures. I don't know, like guided meditations. Videos, like kind of pop videos. There was so much of it that I thought it was more like a promise. Actually, I thought like we could hold abundantly, like abundance, like a promise of it, and because I didn't really feel like I was sort of given like, oh, this is abundance personified, materialized. We've done it. You're here. This is for you. This is how it lives and how it looks like. This is what I was thinking.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, in the sense that it is, I like the idea of a promise very much, and that it is a fragment, right? And a very curated fragment, of course, in the sense that you could say that, oh, well, if abundance, then you do not make choices. But of course, abundance is a proposition in response to a society of scarcity. So yes, you do make choices, where the idea of making space for a lot becomes a political quest, right? Like it cannot be simply just having the space that is present. You have to sort of interfere that the sort of rhythms and structures and sounds and smells that will always be present in the current society. Like if we just let it run as it is running at this moment, which is also happening even though COVID promised, or the pandemic promised potentially a pause, it still continued to run as it did, right? And I think that, so it's a very curated abundance, I would say, and yeah, I think there's a few choices, like to make it very concrete, there's just simply a few choices that you make when you're thinking about, that we made, I'm saying we, Vincent and I, and of course everybody else involved.
Talk to me about some of those choices.
Yeah. Well, embodiment had to be it had to speak, at least from my personal body, and hopefully other people's bodies as well, but of course never pretending complete knowledge of who will encounter the work. It had to speak on a bodily level, so for example, if we're thinking with Carly Rose Bedford's dune of pink sand, glittery sand.
If you find me there later on, I just want to dive in there.
Exactly.
You said it embodied, so I'm going to do it. Okay, go on.
Yes. And like one work that has come up at the start already of the curation immediately was Harry Dodge's shit hot dog cake. And because it has the dripping silicone, which also comes back in Mira Lee's work, etc. But it has the dripping silicone where you just kind of want to put your tongue under it. At least that's what I wanted to do. So there's a few shapes, like, but maybe then I get like already like in a little bit this realm, but like there's a few shapes that come back, right? Like the tentacles, whether that is in Mira Lee's work, which is like a hanging of chains and silicone.
So abundance is also a particular type of physicality, a particular kind of forms.
I think it should evoke, well, that's how we started thinking about it, right? Well, because basically abundance is a sort of tactic to not have to say social justice all the time, or to say like, oh, what would a just and equal society look like? Where you already like get this like lower, deeper voice where you're like, what does a just and equal society look like? Versus like, it also has to have like an embodied effect, like, right? Like how would you move towards that? Or how would you think towards that without it being simply an intellectual exertion? And then the sort of the lekkerheid, I use this word lekker a lot, right? Like it's like the juiciness of it, the of it. And I think that the has had to be represented. Because, yeah, that is for me where this sort of the question of justice, like a potentially different conception of justice for a differently just world, becomes abundance. It is in the physicality, in the sensorial desire for a just world, right? And I think that the desire, I mean, of course, this comes also from a queer discourse. Thinking with Jose Munoz, for example, who talks about queer, which is not yet here, which is a desire for a different kind of world. It's also the desire for something that is seen or portrayed as non-normative desire, right? It's desiring the kind of sex, the kind of intimacies, the kind of architecture that is not currently present.
So you have this conversation, this really beautiful conversation that I forget always her name, Wendy van Olden. I always forget her name.
Wendelin van Oldenborg.
Wendelin, yeah. She captures this conversation between two black people talking about an ambition for blackness, right? This desire for what blackness could be, and what it shouldn't be anymore, and how to liberate blackness from the confines of what it's been, sort of how it's framed and constructed, and also this conversation about hip hop, and I was sitting there and I felt, I don't know, sometimes when I'm listening to theory and I'm listening to analysis, I find this salaciousness of just deep thinking that I find very erotic, and they're walking very slowly in this sort of underground metro hallways and so on, and I found that extremely erotic. Does that make sense? Is analysis erotically charged? Am I the only one who finds that?
I'm seeing some some movement in the chairs. Yeah.
Is that how y'all ended up with Wendeline's work here? With that sense of like, this is just gets me. It got me in my groin. Like it just.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just affirming. I mean, yes. First of all, absolutely. It's funny because I'm now also thinking, because I wrote a story for Damn Horny, which is like a collection of sex. Basically, they asked like for erotic stories, and I wrote a story where I was talking about my sort of erotic response to text, and literally also to the materiality of text at times. Like some typography are very hot to me. I don't know what it is, right? But sorry, that's like to divert from that. But to like Wendelin van Oldenburg work From Left Tonight is what it's called, and also Denise Ferreira da Silva is in there, who graciously provided the subtitle of the Abundance chapter to bring about the end of the world as we know it, with an emphasis on no. And maybe that emphasis on no is exactly where your groin is like hit, right? Like for them to reformulate what blackness could be, it comes from the need to change how we know. Because you have to sort of not undo yourself, but dismantle how we currently know what blackness is, if we're speaking about blackness as they are. And that is fucking erotic.
It's a generative desire.
Yeah.
It's to create something new, something of your own, perhaps somehow. Right? And I was wondering, and given the fact that it was at the very beginning, I then looked at everything else, wondering, what are these artists? What are they invited to create? What do they wanna? What's their generative desire here? And that's why I thought maybe that's what the promise is of abundance. It's like, when unleashed, you will generate, you will create.
I love that.
Yeah.
I will say, like, on a practical note, to bring us down a little bit, is that okay? First of all, I have to sort of detangle a few things. So why Wendelin van Oldenburg? Is also because it, well, it's very important that of course Denise is in there, and it's very important that it talks about surveillance. It's talking about Dean Burke, who is caught by a surveillance camera, well, supposedly caught on tape by a surveillance camera, if you can say it like that, like personalizing the surveillance camera. And he's accused of being part of the riots in London, where he wasn't actually present, but still he's incarcerated for that. And I think for me, what the film really does is that it doesn't just say like, oh, he was unjustly incarcerated, but that it's not enough to say like, oh, he personally was unjustly incarcerated, but that incarceration is unjust in itself, right? So that it's not about like, oh, let's point the right person out, but that we're looking at the system. And this is also where your groin, I think, gets hot, right? Is that
I love how we're talking about my groin. I love it. This is a great.
And I'm also like
I'm
feeling
sorry,
it.
audience, but it's a very important conversation to have.
No, right? Like, but when it doesn't have to be individual, but it can become systematic. And when the systematic thinking is not avoided, because it's kind of like an orgy, to speak with the language of erotic, right? That it doesn't have to stop with the one singular expression of desire. It becomes something bigger. Okay, but then I'm like going away again. But like back to that particular work. What is also important, and indeed gives like a template of maybe what the rest of the show also tries, is that it's so the hip hop work that's happening within it, and the music making really relates, of course, to the technique of collaging, to like sampling, to bringing different voices together without suturing the gaps, right? You can just leave the gaps. Yeah. Like a pause is something in itself. And I think that the work does that, and a lot of Wendeline's work actually does that because it's so conversation based, and she doesn't direct. I'm sure she directs a lot as a filmmaker, but she doesn't really direct the tone of voice, and she sort of lets a lot of coincidence run. So she just simply brings people together, and I think somehow the tonality of that work, like the different tones of voices and the different speeds, right? Like them walking together. Like, is that because they're having an amazing conversation, or is that because they do not know each other and they don't know how? Like, maybe they're like holding back, you know, and they're like, I don't know, or they're trying to stay within the frame. You know, I'm just, you know. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that you said, like, oh, it's at the beginning of the show. And I just wanted to sort of contest that. Because one of the aspects that was also very important to us is that we didn't create one entrance into the circuit of works, or the route of works that doesn't have like a particular kind of route. It just has a sort of flow. Simply because we enter space, like we open a book, and if we read in English or in Dutch, we open it. How to say? Like we open this side, right? And we don't read it from the other side, which of course could also happen. Yeah. Same as with the space. It's not like you're gonna crisscross through the space. You sort of like start to walk like this, like in a route. But we do try to disrupt that, also thinking from not because of disruption, but simply because understanding that there will be so many different kinds of bodies entering that space. Or maybe we should say persons, because last time Kevin Godkin had like opposed of bodies, of using this word bodies. And so you entered at the stairs, but there's also an elevator over there. Okay. And a lot of people also enter through the elevator. And then you will enter the show through, like with Samantha Nye and Carly Rose Bedford. You will enter into the pink realm, right? Yeah. So I think that it really differs from where you're standing. Yeah. And I think it may be important to mention that we really tried also the elevator to be part of the scenography. Okay. So in such a way that the elevator has been broken for many chapters. So previous 3 chapters, there was no elevator in this building, and it wasn't in use for people. Okay. And that was a very important thing, of course, for us to.
So what you're saying is, I need to go back and start from a different point, and then see what it does. Then That's a good point. That's a good.
But if you don't do it, that's also great, because that is exactly also why we wanted the elevator to be like a special place. Is that you can kind of sort of hear in the hallway the rumor that the elevator. Have you seen the elevator? Oh, I entered at Samantha Nye's work, but I entered over there. So like this to create this sort of unknownness about what the start is, and what would be the best way in. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this idea of we must welcome the end of the world as we know it, and I was kind of wondering whether, like, the people that you invited that are here, are they people you feel like are practicing some of that ending of the world? Does abundance end the world as we know it?
Yes.
It does. Okay. So
now I feel like a marketing person. Yes, it does.
Buy
if you come here, the world is
for $9.99. It's great. Buy abundance.
Well, if you, I think again, like, I think abundance has the potential to disrupt the world as we know it. So it's not about ending the world, right? But I think it's a bit arrogant to say yes. I think if you identify scarcity,
mind arrogance. There's nothing necessarily wrong with being arrogant. Huh?
I'll try and flamboyantly say yes then. I mean, like, if you identify scarcity as a model for the way that we think and categorize, and if you identify categorization as a deep and continuous route for oppression and injustice,
as a sort of the method of creating value, of hoe zeg je dat? Toekennen.
Yeah. Attributing? Or
Attributing value.
Yeah.
You need to categorize before you can be like, okay, this is valuable and
Yes.
this isn't. To hierarchize, you need to know, yeah.
For a market of exchange, right? Like you need to know what you're trading for, because if you don't know what you're trading for, like you cannot grow from that or like have a. But yeah, I mean,
Abundance in a very real way disrupts value as a sort of ordered, knowable sort of system.
yeah, I'm just going to continue flamboyantly say yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. But I truly believe that. That's also the thing, right? No, because, and I think it also has to do, actually, now I'm going to continue coming back to the conversation you had with Kevin Godkin. Because something what I also really appreciated around that conversation was also that you had there was a screen here with captioning. And the captioning were actually quite off because it was automatic captioning. And we will also subtitle this, so it's not like we are detracting the captioning. But the screen was continuously happening, and it was giving wrong wording, like it was giving the wrong interpretation of the sound that came out of your mouth. And I think it was the most soothing setup of a conversation for me. Because there was a lot of distraction in a way. I wouldn't say distraction, there was a lot of layerings that were happening. So you were speaking, and then there was the text that came up. And for me, the question of accessibility and the way that Kevin Godkin has been approaching this, right, where it's not about accommodation. So it's not about putting up a ramp so that you can get onto the curb over here or the stage over here. But it's about really creating different kinds of stages from different kinds of embodiment and different kinds of needs. And to me, that leads to abundance. Because what it offers is that this is not necessarily the stage. This is not necessarily a stage. We could have so many different kinds of stages. And why am I mentioning this experience of listening to this conversation is that I realized for me that was a moment of accessibility, actually. That I was able to enter the conversation differently because a lot of things were happening at the same time. And I think that now I'm just sort of psychologizing. I don't mean it to be psychological, but maybe embodied, on an embodied level. The comfort of having so many different things around, happening at the same time. And that experience, on a personal level, for me, does energize or motivate the potential for an actual conceptual framework of abundance. That this is not something to be scared of. And it's not something...
You think we live in fear of abundance?
What do you think?
Well, what I think is... I think that abundance and scarcity kind of exist in some kind of relation, sometimes you can perhaps call it a spectrum of some sort, like a gradient or whatever, and I think sometimes that, this is shaky thinking. I don't know if this will get us anywhere. But sometimes sometimes perhaps we're also beholden to these structures of scarcity, because maybe we only know what abundance is or what it could be because of the scarcity context in which we live in, right? Perhaps we value liberation and freedom. We value sort of the ingenuity of creating and being there, and also the trust that comes with abundance, because we understand and we've lived in this scarcity. So then I can imagine that perhaps it can be perhaps scary, because abundance holds a promise also of alleviating scarcity, right? But then can we really enjoy it then, right? Then just making it disappear, right? Does that make sense?
But it's also a bit Christian, no?
I'm telling you, I was raised Catholic. I can't help it, okay? That's why I said it was shaky thinking, okay? See, we were supposed to hold space here, okay? Calling me out.
I mean, no, it's not, it's... Because if I hear it, and I might hear it wrong, right? But when I listen to you, something comes up around reward, right? It's as if you cannot experience abundance if you do not know what scarcity is, right? Or if you're not like getting the reward. Oh, if I work hard today, which is not necessarily scarcity, right? Like, but if I withhold from having pleasurable things, then tomorrow I can go all out.
Like I'm sometimes, I love porn, for example. I'm a porn enthusiast. But sometimes I'm afraid that if I watch too much porn, which is readily available, right, that I won't enjoy porn anymore because there's so much of it. So then I'm like, maybe I should stop watching porn.
Well, okay, but
because then I will lose my love of it or something.
But have you lost your love?
Oh, no, honey. I have many more years to live. I haven't watched nearly enough porn, but
I mean, I think that fear is really interesting because I do think it comes from. I mean, to me, it sounds very Christian, but because it sounds like it does sound like there's a punishment to enjoying something, right? That you will, if you enjoy something, that the joy of it will dissipate. But what if it does change? You love something else.
Yeah, like making porn.
But it also gives, like making porn. Perfect. No, perfect. Yeah. Start with a storyboard. Yeah. I'm curious.
I'll talk to you.
Don't
worry. We're good, yeah.
Actually, this reminds me of something that was super helpful, actually, in thinking about abundance. But I never thought of it because it's been like a few years. And it was a workshop by Jennifer Lyon Bell, who's a porn maker in the Netherlands, who's been trying to focus on porn made by people who really enjoy it and who are often not seen on the screens because of the bodies that they inhabit. And they did a workshop where they had like a list of different fetishes that you could have, or wants, or desires, and the lists went on. I think the room was like this big, and then like the list went on and on and on and on and on. And they just sort of encouraged you to just look at the lists and just pick a few concepts. Okay. And I just remembered that now that you said this, you should do this. Of course, you should do this workshop. But also, I remembered that then, in that moment, I realized that it was for me actually the abundant presence of all the possibilities that made me feel really excited. And it was actually just that. And I didn't want to choose anything. And nothing particular was really affecting me, right? Like there wasn't like, oh, tentacle sex, or cartoons, or it wasn't like I was like, yeah, that's it. Yeah. But it was actually the abundant presence of all of it.
Yeah.
And that it's not about not wanting to choose, but it's about the potential presence of it. This is not solving your question, though.
No, oftentimes my questions are not solved. This is kind of my life. I end up in this perpetual state of unsolved questions. But anyways.
But I do think, I mean, there is something about this, right? Like using it up. I mean, this, of course, also is present in the
the whole conversation that we have about instant gratification, yes? Yeah. The children are asking good questions. Yeah.
Well, what if it's okay to not know, right?
It's okay to not know.
No, and I don't mean it like as an annoying answer, but I actually mean it like, what if abundance is so successful? Here I'm pleading for the chapter, but like still okay. But bring it back to like ending the world as we know it, right? So I personally do believe that. Like I'm not here. I don't think the chapter as a show conceptualizes what abundance could look like on ecologically farming level, right? I think, I mean, and there would be an argument to do that, to work on a farm and to say like, this is what abundance looks like within the context of this farm. Sorry, I just had to think of like natural environments, but like, or like manufacturing natural environments, because often when we're talking about scarcity and abundance, people start talking about food and lack of food instead of the distribution, right? So that's why I think the farm comes up. But for me, the conceptual framework really is about knowing. So abundance tries
perspectives as well.
Perspectives, but really it's like the dismantling of the categorical thinking, like the frame that even makes it possible for us to currently think that we see, taste, touch, lingually understand something, which I somehow do believe, and this is a belief, just as your fear of, depleting your porn love, that this categorical thinking is deeply informed with scarcity, because it has this idea that you have to prioritize something over something else in order to understand its value. So like it's like, oh yeah, Simone, you cannot talk to Olave and to Eliza. Like, you have to choose who you would rather be talking to. Does that make sense? I'm sorry that I'm using you, Eliza, but...
I mean, I understand it because I think this fits... I know you as a relational philosopher, right? And, right? Is that a good way to... Yeah.
I've never heard this before, but I liked it.
I come up with words because I'm abundant. But...
Do it.
There we go. But, like, I know you as someone who's very interested into sort of how we are positioned and how our relationships sort of interplay, like how, for example, Wilders's hairdo, how it relates to, I don't know, one of the jury members at his trial and who was perhaps looking at it for too long or something. Like, you're interested in those kind of, sort of those ripples of interaction, right? And how these nodes and how information is stored in there, right? That's how I conceive of you. Every time I've heard you speak, I notice how much you're looking at relations and how it's all connected. So what you've just said right now makes me think that perhaps all this time I thought that you were approaching abundance as some kind of, that you're telling us a particular story about the state of things, that things are abundant, right? But I'm now coming to a point where I'm like, maybe you're also proposing a conceptual intervention, that you're asking us to become abundant, to see things as abundant. Not necessarily things are abundant, but to look for the abundant. Is that
yes, and
am I onto something now?
Yes, absolutely. And I thought you were going to say, and I'm sorry that I'm putting it in your mouth right now, but like that it's a relational abundance, right? So that the abundance is not an existential abundance, right? It's not like defining, sorry, I keep using people as a, see, this is where my relationality comes in. So like, it's not about like wanting to see the abundance in the spoon, but to see the abundance between the spoon and the plate. Okay, that's a sucky way of putting it. But
you put it though.
It is not like, it's not about the essence of something, right? So the abundance is not within something. However, I would also say, if you say like, okay, don't look at it as abundant. I think it is relational. Okay, wait, let me put it differently. To put it back to this show. The work, none of the works upstairs, I'm saying upstairs because the show is upstairs. As we mentioned, the elevator. None of the works on themselves. So, okay, they're all valuable and worthy and fantastic and amazing in and of themselves. Simply because everything that exists is in and of itself fantastic and amazing, potentially. And it doesn't need to be judged on that level, right? We don't need that spectrum of, is it good or bad? Yeah. Is it interesting or not? However, while everything in its own right exists, which already doesn't really count for an artwork, right? Because it's already created within relation. Sorry, the Coke is like... the show and the different works really are chosen. So then we come back to the curational aspect in relation to each other. Okay. So the potential, the potential of the works only come in the relation to each other. So for example, we have Wendelin van Oldenburg who relates to Zach Blaas. Because the work, which is the work with the masks that you wanted to steal, and now you cannot anymore because I put it out loud.
Why did you say this in front of the camera? Okay, now I cannot steal it anymore. Damn it.
If the mask works correct, which is like a de-surveillance tool, right? Like a refusal or resistance to surveillance, then you can steal it if it works correct. So like the surveillance that comes in Wendelin's work also comes back in Zach's work. for me, for example, the Zoe Williams work, which is the ceramics,
Yeah.
like the different shapes on the mirror,
Yeah.
and there's like a classic installation where you're immediately
They look like candy to me first. I thought I could lick them. But anyways, go on.
a lot looks
I
like
was- I
candy,
was-
no?
go on.
Did you lick it?
No, I did, but I wanted to. I don't know how expensive that shit is. I don't want to go to jail. Okay, take it easy.
I
I don't know
think
if there are cameras. I don't know. If there had been no
There's
cameras.
no
I would've been-
cameras.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I might
don't
go
think-
back and lick
yeah.
something then.
I think it would be fine. No, but like the way that it's installed is that it has like a really sort of classical way of install. Like it's out there to be shown. You can tell that it's out there to be shown because it's like on a pedestal, and the pedestal has a mirror in it even too, right? So it's not even just shiny; it's double shiny. And for me, it really relates to Harry Dodge's work, like the cake, the dripping cake, where the works come from a series that's called Works of Love. And for me, that phrase, works of love, are immediately telling about so many things, because it's about the fact that a relationality to an object is a form of work and not a form of use. So the idea is often, when we're thinking from this ownership perspective towards an object, that you can own the object or you do not own it, either way, right? And that you can use an object. And I think that for me, Harry Dodge's work really refers to this question that it's actually a work, a making. And this is where he as a sculptor comes in, right? He's working with the materiality. And then from this working, from this trying things out together, because of course the object also shapes you, or the materiality also shapes you, a kind of love starts to come in. A relationality that is difficult, potentially, but it exceeds the fetishization that often happens when it concerns objects, right? Where it's a one-way sort of relationship. And why am I saying all of this? Because in relationship to, again, relation. Now relation is like your word that you threw in. With Zoe Williams' work, this question of abundance becomes kind of criticized, because if we look at on an art historical perspective, the way that abundance has often been portrayed, if we think about like the kind of paintings that you see in the museum, it's this question of ownership comes up, right? You see the cornucopia, you see the wealth that's portrayed within the frame of the painting, the fruit on the fruit. In the fruit bowl, which sounds very
yeah.
the cornucopia. Yeah. And this, for me, I think this is also where abundance comes in, right? Like, for me, this object relationship, this idea that something is there for your enjoyment, and that abundance should be captured, that abundance should be framed, that it should be in your ownership in order for it to be kept.
Yeah.
That it should be kept as your porn love.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be kept, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't save your love for porn, you will have other loves.
Yeah.
Don't worry, right?
Yeah.
But there is this idea that this is a
very
scarcity.
therapeutic for me right now. Thank you.
Continue watching,
it
baby.
is.
Just yeah, but don't hold. No, I mean, but I think that because there is a relationship to modesty, right, and to holding back, that it has to do with ownership. So like if you hold back, you continue to own the object, or you continue to own your wealth, because it doesn't dissipate. If you spend it, you dissipate, right? Yeah. And okay, all of this to say that abundance can be, of course, okay, well, we have this one relationship to abundance where you capture it and you frame it and you put it up on a pedestal.
And then you sell it as well?
And then you sell it. And you can sort of, you can question that. But I think for me, where abundance really comes in is that if we have been trained to look at it like that, so if we have been trained that if there is a painting, it is inviting you to look at it. And you are the looker. And you are the one that's valuing the painting. This this space is what needs to be disrupted. And that is, I think, where abundance comes in. I hope that's still somewhat clear. That
I think that makes sense to me. I think that makes sense to me. Also because there's so much of some of the pieces here take such a meditative and sort of healing aspect to it that it really kind of, when I was sitting in the I'm very bad with names. The second one, next to from Left to Night.
yeah. Evan Ifekoya.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that space really, I felt held, and I felt sort of told to calm down, told to be quiet, to come to rest, and maybe not be in such a need to hold, to keep, to accrue, and I felt very much. As I was listening, I sat in the middle of the thing and I was listening, and I don't know, are we allowed to sit in there? Yeah, okay. So I was sitting in the thing and I felt very much like, whoa, I think it's very, like I come to a lot of museums and a lot of exhibition spaces as kind of like, these are all the valuable, amazing things that if you are a true, lover of art, you should have. And I'm sitting suddenly in this booth where somebody's telling me, calm down, you are the center of the universe, that kind of, and I found that really, I thought it would be so nice to have that more often before I go into an artistic or a sort of exhibition. This moment to be reminded that I'm enough, that I don't need to go there and hope for the things I could take with me and that I would then become more or something. Does that make sense? I appreciated that. I appreciate that intervention. So I think I can see where you're trying to say, like, we wanted to sort of create different relationships between you and me, the looker, and the art that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and what you describe, I mean, museums,
Yeah.
as a production of knowledge.
Yeah.
So everything is so
and
much
production of value as well.
a production of value. But this is exactly it. Is that the production of knowledge is completely tied to the production of value.
Yeah.
And I don't think that relationship can be broken necessarily, but it has to be subsumed.
Did you find yourself wondering about, quality and about truth and about, the right names, the right... No?
I mean, it would be easy to say no, because I'm sure like somewhere in me this is already like a precondition, right? So I don't want to put that off of me. I'm looking at Vincent also because...
Oh, are we over time? We're still good with time?
No,
Okay.
0 minutes.
0 minutes or a few minutes.
I love scarcity.
Then we have to stop.
Yeah.
Finish your thought.
Yeah. I feel like it would be like giving myself an easy way out to say no, but I honestly, you know what came up with me? Is this word of trust. So I don't think I can identify quality. Like literally, I don't. But I really do not know what I would want from somebody. Like an artist, if you would ask them or commission them or like if you want somebody to write a piece, right? Like this also, it's not just curating a show. This is also like any time organizing with artists or organizing with activists. I feel it's so stupid, so this is why I cannot say it, but the energy that goes into trusting is for me already so like, it sounds, okay, I'm just gonna say, it's so fucking satisfying. Okay. And it's so energetic. That the quality is it's not in the object, right? It's not in the production. It's not in the result. I mean, I know this all sounds fucking corny, but it is, I think it's super true. And so when you posed your question, the word trust, even though I'm not really relating to that word at this moment, it really did come up with me.
Do I trust?
it's like trusting the discourse of the artist,
Yeah.
trusting the sort of interests of the artists. Then you don't even have to see the exact work. And maybe now I'm like giving myself away
Yeah.
as a really bad curatorial, but I don't think,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it evolves around that. Maybe
Yeah.
Vincent will be like, yeah, well, luckily I kept it all,
Yeah.
qualitative.
If you only knew the people they wanted here.
But that's also actually how I do want to continue working, though. Which actually excludes also a lot of people, I'm sure. Because the art world... So, and I had a lot of people, who worked with those productional threads that I think, like, if I were to do it, I mean, I'm never going to do this, like, anything by myself, but communication, like talking with people, and this relationality would be so important that I'm sure a lot of people with agents would sort of, not be part of the show because
Interesting.
because it would create this barrier of thinking together.
In any case, I'm very glad with the people you brought together. And I feel like what you've done is also I think you've expressed a certain trust in the audience. And not necessarily that the audience will get it or something, but I think you trusted us to savor it, to be, to walk into those spaces and respond to some of the, that groin movements, but also the wanting to lick things and the joy of, like, there's so much joy in Samantha Knife, for example. There's so much joy. I think in that you trusted us to be there with you, wholly, and with those artists, and I think that's very valuable, and I wanna thank you for that, for having made that for
Thank
us
you.
as well. They've trusted us as well, and I hope you keep doing this.
Thanks.
I hope you don't stop.
Don't stop till you get enough. Also, there's a beautiful story by you.
In the zine. Stop talking about the things I do. This is about you today, okay? Listen.
It's not
we're gonna
excluding.
ask
It's
because we're
sparsity.
gonna ask the camera to stop now, right? Because we're over time.